sharp whisper cut through the silence. Half asleep, I felt the warmth beside me shift. My husband was speaking softly into his phone, his voice barely above a murmur. It wasn't the usual groggy, half-hearted morning talk. No. This was different, low, urgent, like he didn't want me to hear. I cracked my eyes open just enough to see his silhouette standing near the door, his back turned to me. I closed my eyes again, pretending to be asleep. My heart pounded in my chest, though I didn't understand why. Maybe it was the tone, the way he was careful with his words, like he was measuring each one before speaking. The sheets rustled as he moved. I held my breath, listening. Pause. Then the click of the bathroom door shutting. The lock turned. He never locked the bathroom door. I stayed still, every fiber of my being alert. The muffled conversation continued behind the wooden frame, just low enough that I couldn't make out the words. But it wasn't work. I knew his work calls, straight to the point, always the same. This had an edge to it. Minutes passed. Too many. The toilet flushed, water ran briefly, and then silence. When he finally emerged, his face was neutral, but there was something off. He glanced at me, probably checking if I was awake. I kept my breathing even, steady, my body relaxed against the pillows. He exhaled, sat on the bed for a moment, then left the room without a word. I should have let it go. I should have told myself it was nothing. But something in my gut twisted in warning. An hour later, the doorbell rang. I pulled on my robe and made my way downstairs. My nephew stood there, grinning, fresh coffee in his hand like he always did when he stopped by. "Mornin'," he said casually, stepping inside. His eyes flickered over my face and his smile faltered just slightly. I don't know if something happened." I hesitated. My throat was dry. "No," I said quickly. "Just didn't sleep well." "Why?" But even as I said it, I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. Him or myself. Dinner felt normal. Too normal. My husband smiled, poured my wine before I could reach for it, asked about my day like he actually cared. His hand brushed mine across the table, his eyes warm, affectionate. If I hadn't woken up to that hushed phone call this morning, I might have believed it. But now, every glance, every casual touch felt rehearsed, like he was reading from a script. My best friend sat across from me, twirling the stem of her glass between her fingers, watching him like she saw something I didn't. "You know," she said, her voice light but pointed, "sometimes when a man's acting too perfect, it's just a well-practiced routine." I forced a laugh, but her words sat heavy in my chest. Then his phone buzzed. His fingers twitched. Without missing a beat, he flipped it over, screen down, and excused himself, disappearing into the hallway. My pulse spiked. I pushed back my chair, followed on quiet steps. From the doorway I saw his lips curve into a smile, heard his voice drop into something softer, something intimate. "I miss you too," he murmured. But he wasn't talking to me. The air was crisp, the streets quiet, and the distant hum of the city filled the silence between us. My nephew walked beside me, hands in his pockets, his gaze flickering to me every so often. I told myself this was just a walk, just a distraction, but something about the way he looked at me felt different tonight. We talked about life, about nothing, about everything except what was really on my mind. Then out of nowhere he said it. "You deserve more than this." His voice was steady, sure, like he had been waiting to say those words. My breath caught, my stomach tightened. I forced a laugh, tried to wave it off, but the way he looked at me made it impossible. The air between us changed. He stopped walking, turned to face me, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could react, before I could even think, his lips were on mine. Soft, warm, familiar in a way that terrified me. I should have pulled away. I didn't. And the worst part? I didn't want to. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the warmth of his lips, the way his hands lingered just long enough to make me forget myself. Guilt sat heavy in my chest, but it wasn't just the guilt. It was the way I couldn't stop replaying it, the way my body still responded to the memory. Morning came too soon. I moved through the house in a daze, hoping the cold shower would wash away whatever this was, but it clung to me. At breakfast, my husband sipped his coffee, watching me too closely. "You seem distracted," he said casually, flipping through his emails. "Work. Or something else?" My stomach tightened. I forced a smile, shook my head, but his words dug into me like he already knew. Later, my nephew stopped by, relaxed, easy, acting as if nothing had happened, but his glances lingered a second too long. My best friend wasn't fooled either. "You're different," she said, narrowing her eyes. "Jumpy. You're hiding something." I laughed it off, changed the subject, but deep down I knew she was right. Something had shifted and I couldn't ignore it. He surprised me with dinner reservations, something he hadn't done in months. "Just us," he said, smiling like everything was fine. Like he wasn't sneaking off for hushed phone calls, like he didn't see the way my mind had been elsewhere. The restaurant was intimate, low lighting, soft music, the kind of place designed to make you forget reality. He poured my wine, held my hand, looked at me the way he used to when we first met. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his thumb tracing slow circles on my skin. His words felt scripted. I played along. We laughed, we talked, and for a fleeting moment I almost convinced myself this was real. Then he kissed me, soft, deliberate, as if trying to erase something I wasn't supposed to know. Later at home I found his suit jacket draped over a chair. A folded piece of paper peeked from the pocket. I pulled it out, my heart pounding. 5 words, scrawled in quick handwriting: "Don't forget. Tomorrow. 5 p.m. My stomach twisted. Who wrote this? And why did it feel like he wanted me distracted tonight? He left earlier than usual, dressed sharper than a regular workday. I waited, heart pounding, before grabbing my keys and following at a safe distance. My hands trembled on the wheel, my mind racing. Maybe it was a business meeting. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down I knew. He parked outside a small cafe, the kind where people went when they didn't want to be noticed. I pulled into a spot across the street, watching as he stepped inside. Then I saw her. She was already there, waiting for him, a confident smile on her lips. They talked, leaning in close, their gestures natural, too comfortable. He laughed in a way I hadn't seen in years, and when their hands brushed, he didn't pull away. A pit formed in my stomach. I barely noticed my nephew pulling up next to me. He didn't ask why I was there. He just looked at me, his voice quiet. "Are you ready for the truth?" I swallowed hard, my nails digging into my palms. I wasn't sure what scared me more, what I was about to find out or what I was willing to do next. I sat in my car, my mind a tangled mess of doubt and anger. My nephew stayed quiet, his presence steady, like he knew I needed space to process what I'd just seen. I exhaled shakily, gripping the steering wheel, forcing myself to think logically. "Maybe I'm overreacting," I muttered, barely believing my own words. He leaned back, studying me, his expression unreadable. "Are you?" His voice was low, careful, as if he already knew the answer. I wanted to argue, to tell him I wasn't the kind of woman who jumped to conclusions, but the image of my husband, leaning in too close, laughing too easily, was burned into my mind. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He shifted, turning toward me, his gaze intense. "You deserve better," he said, his hand reaching for mine, his touch warm, grounding. "You know that, right?" The air between us grew heavy. I felt it, the pull, the unspoken tension that had been building for days. I yanked my hand away, heart racing. "I can't," I breathed. But the truth was, I wasn't sure if I wanted to. I had spent the entire morning convincing myself I was overthinking, that I needed to stop spiraling, that maybe I was just looking for something that wasn't there. But deep down I knew. I needed to see it for myself. No warnings, no calls. I just got in my car and drove straight to his office. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, my pulse steady but unnervingly strong. By the time I stepped into the building, my body felt disconnected from my mind, moving on instinct. The receptionist smiled at me, not suspecting a thing, as I walked past her desk and down the hallway. His door was slightly open. That's when I saw it. Him. Her. Their lips pressed together, his hands on her waist, her fingers curled into his collar. My breath hitched, but I didn't move. Then he turned. His eyes widened, his body tensed, and in that split second everything stopped. The blood drained from his face. The woman stepped back, adjusting her blouse, her expression unreadable. I didn't yell. Didn't cry. Didn't say a word. I just looked at him, held his gaze for a moment too long, then turned around and walked away. I spent the evening staring at nothing, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My mind replayed it all. The whispers, the secrecy, the way he kissed her like I no longer existed. I felt hollow, like a stranger in my own life. I should have been furious, should have screamed, but all I felt was exhaustion. The knock at the door startled me. I didn't need to look. I already knew. My nephew stepped inside, his presence steady, familiar. You don't have to go back, he said softly, standing close but not too close. You're free now. You can finally be happy. His words should have comforted me, but instead, they unraveled something dangerous inside me. I turned to him, my fingers twitching at my sides. The pull between us was undeniable, stronger now in the quiet of my empty home. Slowly, almost instinctively, I reached for him, but at the last second my hand froze. My breath hitched. I couldn't. I wouldn't. His expression didn't change. He just exhaled, nodded once and stepped back. Without another word he walked away, leaving me standing there, alone with a choice I wasn't ready to make. I sat across from him, the table between us feeling like a battlefield. His eyes, once so familiar, now held nothing but regret. I was going to end it, he said, his voice low, careful. I just didn't do it fast enough. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. It was almost funny how predictable his excuse was. As if that made any difference. As if it would erase the image of him with her, the way he touched her like I had already been erased. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Don't, I whispered. The silence stretched, and for the first time I realized, I didn't know this man at all. I walked out without another word, without looking back. When I got home, the emptiness hit me all at once. No husband. No nephew. No comfort in the choices I had made. My phone buzzed on the counter. One new message. Did you make the right choice? My fingers hovered over the screen. My chest tightened. I swallowed hard. And for the first time I admitted the truth. I didn't know.